Specifically, Doc, the president is being accused by opposition figures and political parties of a deliberate, destabilization of, even suppression, of political parties. Political actors, opposition actors are being hounded, either in detention or put through the judicial system and all of those. Can you speak to this? The allegation against the president, the ruling party, the administration of a deliberate effort to weaken, destabilize, hound opposition, both the parties and actors.
Now, descending to the realm of the politicking, you will discover, and this is why I stayed at the level of asking us to understand that there is a deliberate, conscious attempt not to obey the Constitution. When you look at the Constitution in terms of relating with other stakeholders of the Nigerian state and the democratic project, we are supposed to operate a participatory democracy. And the moment you get sworn in as President Commander-in-Chief, you are expected to transmute and transition to governance services delivery, for which you ought to allow the engagement, the strategic engagement, and the participation of other stakeholders. And one of the hallmark of participatory democracy is a robust debate where you can easily tap from the opposition their ideas. Unfortunately, it is correct to summarize and say it seems as if the opposition and the civic space is already emasculated, is being made to shrink, and people are now beginning to gravitate towards the idea of saying, we know who the prince in office is, and perquisites of existence and sustenance cometh from him, so we need to move in that direction. It is at that attempt that any government in power dictates the tune that you now have political actors moving in that direction. And it is because the incumbent administration has failed to allow for robust debates, and that is why you have been having people crossing over from one political party to the other. In the National Assembly, when they cross over from one political party to the other, you will discover that rather than activate the constitutional provisos that says they automatically should lose their seats, what happens is that they gloss over it because they have moved into the ruling party. And then you now have a situation where a senator, Abaribe, for example, was nearly made to lose his own seat, but they managed it because if they allowed it to happen the way they were going on that day on the floor of the Senate, it will boomerang and will cause katakata. So they have had to quieten and say, no, be guided, let us go. Now everything is on the wraps. If you have a system that is like that, and when you take a look at some of the litigations that have bedeviled the political parties, whereas it's very difficult to immediately say you can point to these particular characters and episodes that have led to this, you will appreciate that there is going to be some elements of truth in this fact that all these things have been happening. I'll give you a good example that we need to understand. Recently on the Orire matter, a certain Ayodele Fayose, former governor of Ekiti State, made an allegation by June 1, the day after the presidential delegation visited Orire, the community where the crisis occurred, and made some allegations and tied it to political matter against Seyi Makinde, the incumbent governor of Oyo State. Interestingly, that certain Ayodele Fayose has now been rewarded with the chairmanship of the Rural Electrification Agency, which speaks volumes. And some of the things that he said on that occasion that made Seyi Makinde, the governor of Oyo State, to make reference to the fact that I needed a lot more investigation. When you want to look at it, the way they have been emasculating and then trying to strangulate the opposition is so bad. I'm not trying to hold brief for any of these characters. I normally try as much as possible to obey what my mother asked me to do before she died. She passed on in our hands here in Abuja, literally speaking, and she wanted me not to become partisan in politics, but I discuss it. When you look at the Orire thing, what the governor Seyi Makinde probably would be saying, and I understand it from my own past antecedents of being involved in this system. The incumbent president of the country traveled for 13 days on a 3-country trip, beginning of May 3, and then he returned on May 15. On May 11, that's the timeline we need to understand. On May 11, a certain Major General Famadewa was appointed through a release from the office of the media advisory team and the secretary to government, that he was appointed Homeland Security Advisor on May 11. On May 14, a political event occurred in Ibadan. On May 15, the abduction occurred. That's the timeline. And nothing was done by the federal government, as it were, in terms of sending delegation in the real sense of it to that place until May 31, a day after the governor of Oyo State visited. So if anybody is trying to develop a conspiratorial thesis, you take a look at the timeline. How come this occurred 4 days after the Homeland Security Advisor appointment was announced? How come the so-called Homeland Security Advisor, who happens by his name to be Yoruba and obviously from Southwest, did not show up as part of the federal government delegation? The person that showed up included the Chief of Staff to the President Commander-in-Chief and the National Security Advisor. These are the real issues that we should be discussing. How come they showed up and they went to the place and they traveled by helicopter? And if you are familiar with the story, most of the people in those communities have equally talked about other certain helicopter flying in that jurisdiction. So when you want to discuss all these things, you'll discover that the main interest of this administration has been to stifle opposition, shrink the civic space, make sure that they attack as many persons who are speaking, that are having a voice representing the people, and that is why you'll discover that a number of actors are now becoming silent, and then people are being hounded.
Let me do this follow-up quickly because where time is flying. There are specific cases of attempts being made by certain individuals to encumber the PDP. The PDP, more or less now, is total disarray, total complete disarray. You don't even know whether it still exists, or legally speaking. The ADC, from one court case to the other, being bounced from one courthouse to the other. One decision today says, oh, all clear. Another decision tomorrow says, no, you have a case to answer. So, and then the NDC, of course, you remember the case of the Lokoja High Court that says, no, register them December last year. Suddenly wakes up June this year and says, no, deregister them. After they've completed all party conventions, party primaries and all of that. The SDP. Doc, I could go on and on. I want you to speak to these specific instances of shadowy individuals. Some in the office of the chief of staff to the president, some known faces of government attempting to, overtly, not even overtly to destabilize these political parties and actors. And as it's been alleged, to ensure 2027 we do not have a real contest, we end up with a coronation, we end up with effectively a one-party state. Address this, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, Doc.
I will address it this way by speaking directly to His Lordship, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekereekun. My Lord, congratulations for being in office at a time like this. We are doing this interview about 176 days away from the presidential election. I plead with you to remember the 6-month rule, and I will ask you to use your good offices as the Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Chair of the Judicial Council, to issue the necessary practice direction that will ensure that all litigations, all manner of funny cases that can make Nigeria to go against this 6-month rule as provided for by ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance, and the International Covenant on Civic and Political Rights. I plead with you to understand that the Nigerian judiciary may never recover should all these political litigations that are ongoing eventually contribute significantly to derailing the democratic experiment in the Nigerian state. It will fall under you. You are the incumbent Lordship Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kudirat Kekereekun, Grand Commander Order of Niger. I plead with you to do the needful. And in the same vein, I want to speak to some of the presidential candidates, particularly Peter Obi, his vice presidential candidate, Kwankwaso, who are instigating legal proceedings against individuals during this period. They too must obey the 6-month rule by ensuring that every manner of litigation is terminated or suspended until after the elections. I am saying this because you wanted me to start discussing. No, the real crux of the matter is that when you have the international covenant and all these supplementary protocols that Nigeria is a state party to being breached, as we are breaching it now, we are creating the necessary mix for a political upheaval. Some of us have built scenarios around and saying that we may end up having a major political crisis. You, the political parties, you, the presidential candidates, aspirants, and whatever, you need to go and read the book that was written on Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. He constituted a presidential team of rivals. The same thing goes to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. In the last 3.5 years, or the 3 years plus now, that you've been in office, you've not successfully harnessed the resources of the political space.
Doc, I know you've spoken passionately and patriotically, I might add, on the appealing to the conscience of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Kudirat Kekereekun. You even called on now the newly inaugurated or elected MBA president, Mrs. What's her name? Consola. SAN. Okay, but I won't let you leave. I won't allow us to leave this subject of the judiciary without asking you. We lived through the judicial system as it operated under the dark days of the military in this country, the military dictatorships and all of that, and how the judicial system then, the bar and the bench, acquitted themselves, reasonably holding themselves to very high standards. I want you to do a comparison between the judicial system then and now, the confidence, engendered in the everyday Nigerian people, compared from then to now? 1 or 2 minutes, if you can.
It's unfortunate that the quality and standards and level of compliance with the legal and policy frameworks of the Nigerian state have become suspect with regards to the judicial and legal system of the Nigerian state. I was privileged in the early 2000s to have been a consultant to the World Bank HEMCAP projects on the review and reform of the administration of legal and justice system with the U.S. Center for Law Studies. We've never had it this bad, and I can only plead with those who are in practice today to kindly understand that if we do not correct this trend, we will have a major crisis, the beginning of which we may all know, but the ending we may never be part of seeing. And as such, the people that are creating most of this crisis are legal practitioners, whether they are in the bar or on the bench. Like the certain Daniel Buhala, who is a legal practitioner, who posted that thing on his X. I find it very strange that a legal practitioner in the ilk of the certain Daniel Buhala will post such a thing. It's very sad. It is very sad that counsels will take briefs and will not ensure that the pleadings are such that will attract the best out of the judges and the case law management system and the kind of authorities being cited and the way they are expected to generate the interest of reposing confidence in the judicial system is waning. I pray that all this will change.
You touched on my next question now when you spoke. So, the weaponization of the cyber crimes, law in Nigeria. I don't know what your view is on this, because it is being weaponized against ordinary citizens who are probably doing, what citizens' activism. I mean, you referenced a couple of times now, presidential candidate of the AAC, Mr. Omoyele Sowore, is being put through the court judicial system. In fact, he was remanded in prison custody a couple of weeks ago and then granted bail again and all of that. This is a presidential candidate who ordinarily should enjoy certain immunities and privileges as a candidate against the incumbent president. But what was his offense? That he insulted the president, called the president a derogatory term. Are you worried that the Cyber Crimes Act is being weaponized against media practitioners, opposition figures, or everyday Nigerian citizens? Doc.
It is very unfortunate that those who have the privileges of reading and applying the legal and policy frameworks of the Nigerian state have chosen to use it to conscript, to shriek, and to strangulate and suffocate the civic space. Unfortunately, the crimes and criminalities associated with digital age has caught up with that sector, and that is why the incumbent chairman of the EFCC now talks about the fact that a number of things are happening. But these things will happen, and the aspect that he should have helped us to interrogate a little further. It is good for him to say there's a particular young man that had about 5 billion processed through his accounts from politically exposed person. Who is that politically exposed person, my brother Olukayode? Who? You need to mention so that we can do the public shaming and we can know the kind of category that we are dealing with. So that this weaponization of cybercrime laws against people that are involved in activism. And that is why even those of us who are privileged to feature in programs like this, we are very mindful of the fact that even though you know a lot more, you don't want to operate or disclose anything that will make you run foul. For example, it's now about 5 years ago that a certain chief of army staff died in an air crash, May 21 of that year. How many reports have been generated to review the circumstances that led to the decision to put in the same aircraft the chief of army staff, chief of military intelligence, the provost marshal, and his chief of staff, to the extent that they will just die?
Is that abnormal? Is that?
You are not supposed such officers. The SOP does not allow such officers to travel in the same equipment. Now, what happened? Does it have anything to do with this war on terror? Have we taken the pains of reflecting on what happened to Flight Lieutenant Tolulope Arotile? We need to reinvestigate this.